All right, everyone, we have big U.S. political news. This could not wait until tomorrow, although, I would have liked to, but, it's a thing. Stephen Breyer is retiring. He's one of the foremost liberal justices on the court. He's relatively far left, although I don't know that you'd lump him in as being quite as far to the left as Kagan or Sotomayor. And I think that this is rather telling, the timing. I don't think that it was a coincidence that you have less than a month into the year right before midterms, and that's when he chooses to retire. Because you'll remember, people have been encouraging that on the left for a half a decade. Well, we don't want you to get... Why don't you retire? Because the 2016 election is approaching, and it might not be Hillary Clinton. Now would be a good time to go. They did the same with Ginsburg, although very low-key because, of course, she's female, and so that comes with additional complications. By the way, I'll make a guess about the form of the eventual Biden court nominee, which will be shoved through, probably with Kamala Harris reigning over it, which possibly plays a role in what gender and race that person is, because then it's a big, id poll victory for the leftoids that haven't gotten their student loan debt forgiveness or anything else Biden promised. Stephen Breyer, I think, is retiring now because he's more cerebral. He's an older school Dem, not just liberal ideologically. He clearly sides with that partisan core. He expects the GOP to win in the Senate in the midterms. He is looking at a 50-50 split now where if the GOP gets one additional Senate seat, and they're probably going to get two, possibly three, if he then has to retire, and has an aneurysm like Biden has several times, or if he dies, then the Republicans will say, well, hey, Senate Democrats, you remember when you wouldn't negotiate at all? Why should we give you another Supreme Court nominee? It's after the midterms. Now's not the time to do it. We have to wait until the 24 election. Hint, they did this with Garland before. Remember when Obama wanted to put him on the court to replace Scalia, and the Republicans said no way because you'll be making a supermajority liberal court. No thanks. By the way, it would still be tilted liberal if they had allowed it to go through. They actually held the line. It didn't cost him anything either. It's almost like when you don't cuck repeatedly, your fans don't go over to the other party or stay home. The GOP under Trump has grown a few balls since then as well. Anyway, I think he expects the midterms to be a disaster. He doesn't want that scenario. He also doesn't want a scenario where it keels over in 2025 when Trump's second term or DeSantis' term or fucking Ted Cruz's term, has begun. I don't think he believes that Biden will win either. Hell, he probably doesn't even believe Biden will be the nominee. But when I look at the line of succession and the Dems that are adjacent to the executive branch that can run, I don't think he has a lot of faith in them too. So he'll be replaced by Biden. There will be, debate over it. The Republicans will complain about who's appointed. The problem is this, and this gets us to what form this new justice will take. It will almost certainly be at least one of the following: non-straight, non-male, or non-white. Why? It's not because Biden gives a shit about these things. Biden's interactions with women and his statements with regards to minorities belie his true intentions and feelings. He sees them as nothing more than pawns. He happens to be a Democrat. He has to play that game. In private, he probably uses the N-word and fantasizes about all the staffers that are around him. Especially as he gets more demented, we might end up with a State of the Union where he has a brain fart and calls someone the R-word or something. I have to use those terms because this is a YouTube video too. It's too important to limit the platform that it's on. People have got to know this because this analysis you will see that it's true. Breyer will be replaced. It'll be messy in the sense that the Republicans will howl about it, but there's nothing they can do. It'll come down to Kamala. She'll green light it. If there's any shenanigans from Manchin or Sinema on this, I'd be very, very surprised. Them not wanting to get rid of the filibuster is all about having Senate power and holding it over their own party's head and getting reelected. This, on the other hand, unless the appointee was absolutely uniquely unqualified, should go off without a hitch. Now, some people are already making guesses or putting forth names that they think would be good. Some people have even mentioned Kamala Harris. If she were not the vice president at the moment, asterisk VP of course, I would honestly agree with them. She's on the youngish side, by SCOTUS standards. She's in her mid-50s. She's black and she's female. It's the perfect pick. The problem is that the GOP will get castigated and cast off as racist, sexist, and evil, and behind the times and hates progress, no matter who the nominee is. It will be a leftist. This means that constitutionally, they're not going to be qualified to any reasonable standards. By the way, independent backlash may be a thing after they attempt to replace Breyer with someone who's clearly a diversity hire. But it won't be Kamala. I think that Joe Biden in his wildest fever dreams would love that. Hey, if I croak, that bitch is no longer in the line of succession. She's been appointed to SCOTUS. She'll be there forever. We never have to worry about her trying to run for the presidency. By the way, would she even accept it? I think that she has a bigger ego than that. I don't think that she wants to be one of 9 top dogs of a branch when she harbors fantasies of being the top dog of the country. She knows that in the next couple of years, Biden may keel over. He's an old man, he's not of sound mind, and he's in failing health. Quite clearly, fucker can barely walk, although he pretends that he can still bike for long periods of time and that it's not just a meth-fueled photo op. But someone like her, it would be a likelihood. Now, who would it be? They might try to draft Stacey Abrams, of all people. Don't fucking put it past them. Michelle Obama is perennially mentioned. By the way, you'll notice that there's a similarity between these 3 people. The Democratic Party effectively is going to put forth someone who's there primarily to bring diversity to the court, because he's an old white dude, and now we look more like the country in the Supreme Court. They're all still rich, but just ignore that little differentiation. Much like you're supposed to do that for Congress and for U.S. presidents. By the way, Trump definitely doesn't rock the boat in that respect. Just saying. But the Republicans, if they bring up track record, decision making, usually it'd be a lawyer or a current judge or someone like that. It could be a politician. Taft was, after he was president, he was on the Supreme Court for a while. That could be a possibility. They'll attack on an ideological basis. They'll say, well, you think that guns aren't protected by the Second Amendment. You think that censorship is okay. You think mandatory vaccines are all right, and a laundry list of things that they wouldn't ideologically agree on for political purposes, and that a lot of independents wouldn't agree on either. But it'll take a backseat. The Democrats will say, well, you're just whining because you can't stand a strong, empowered woman. You're just whining because you want to keep BIPOC down, etc., etc., etc. That's how it will go. They're not going to replace him almost certainly with a white male. I'd be very surprised if it were another white male, unless it's someone who has some other id poll leanings. It would be Pete Buttigieg. Well, he's also gay. He's the first openly gay Supreme Court justice. Why? Because Biden right now is failing, flailing, and foundering. His approval is in the shitter nearing the 30s. It's lower now than what Trump was at, despite being pounded incessantly by legacy media, Biden getting propped up by them and still managing to come out at about the same rate. He's failed on the COVID response. He's about to have a major foreign policy blunder in Ukraine. It's the writing's on the wall. He's not going to handle the situation well. It'll be a theater performance about American weakness under neoliberalism. Afghanistan, inflation, shortages. The list goes on and on. He's got nothing to give to the leftoids especially. Some of the people that are leaving the Dem Party, they're not becoming Republicans. They're effectively green or further left people that stayed out of the Democratic Party because they wanted it to be more progressive. And then they saw AOC and Bernie was in there and they jumped aboard the Democratic Party. It's not because they're even pissed about party politics. They're pissed about ideology, and Biden hasn't given them anything other than a half-assed delay in student loan repayment and a watered-down infrastructure bill that at the end of the day, it really was useless. Well, then give them some id-poll, bread and circus for the id-poll left. While increasingly far leftists are less inclined towards identity politics of that type, while they're starting to clamor for actual economic progress, as they would call it, there's a huge core of them that would like it if an old white dude on the Supreme Court, as a relic, a vestigial a relic from a former era, back when we had white male supremacy, we need someone who's strong and empowered, diverse, and beautiful. Because there's nothing else to do. There's nothing else to offer. And by the way, speaking ideologically, while Breyer may not be as frenetic as Kagan or Sotomayor, replacing him with a leftoid isn't really going to change the composition of the court. So why doesn't Biden, since he's not changing anything in the judicial sense, get some brownie points from some of his alienated constituents? A handful, by the way, of independents that were leaning towards the Democrats probably will not like this. It's almost a no-win situation having to replace a sitting justice at the moment because of the hyper-politicization of the U.S. So Breyer's gone. If we can say anything positive about him, because he joined, the majority liberal decision 90% of the time, 95%. He was almost never a swing justice. These days, that's Kavanaugh. It used to be Roberts, and Roberts leans towards the liberal side. Don't let him fool you. Bush wasn't a conservative. He conserved absolutely nothing. Ammo, third world children's lives, the environment, the economy. His own sanity comes to mind as well. Looking at the court, if we can say something positive about him, it's that he was a wordsmith. Constantly badgering even people he clearly was going to rule with. Even on the OSHA decision, you heard him badgering over and over and over again, both sides. He's probably the only justice there that genuinely enjoyed his job. The others are all ideologues, or they're kind of reluctant. Like Kavanaugh never looks like he's happy in his job. He's doing it out of a sense of ideological duty. Roberts, I think, maybe, kind of, and then Clarence Thomas is just sort of there and votes and never asked questions till recently. Now that Kavanaugh's there, I suppose he feels more entitled. Kagan and Sotomayor and Gorsuch are just idealistic individuals. Breyer was the one, he's sort of like the prankster. He was sort of like the Carlos of Magic School Bus or something like that. Anyway, it won't change the composition of the court, but don't expect it to be held up. Don't expect Manchin or Sinema to do anything unless it's someone that's really goddamn out there. They'll raise questions. They'll ask a couple of them, and then they'll vote party line on that. Just like they did on the election takeover attempt, they just didn't want to give up their filibuster senatorial powers. That's the only thing that they decided to maintain about that, because they're expecting the Senate to become GOP-led as well. They don't want to be the ones that took down the filibuster. They expect the GOP will have to do it, and then it'll implode in their face. GOP is very good at that, by the way, taking a defeat from the jaws of victory. But yes, Breyer clearly, he's aware of the fact that there is a very good chance the Senate goes to the GOP, at least narrowly in the next election. Not to say anything about the House, although it has nothing to do with the judicial appointment. He doesn't want to end up with his legacy being he held on too long, and then he either got replaced by the Republicans after 24, or that it became a really messy problem and it was punted, and so there was a Supreme Court vacancy, and not helping the liberals, by the way. The conservatives would still have the votes to do whatever they wanted. By the way, there would be 5 of them if you include Kavanaugh. Kavanaugh would become the kingmaker of judicial politics for up to a couple of years if Breyer were to keel over after the midterms but before the 24 election. I don't think that he expects Biden to win re-election. I think he expects there'll be a Republican president and Senate, and he doesn't want to do that because he is a partisan ideologue. He genuinely cares about democracy in the small d sense to the conclusion that he thinks that the Democrats are better for the country and those Republicans are too fanatic. I think he's not an ideologue in the sense. He genuinely believes it. He's not just bluffing. That's about all. Peace out.